this is a very interesting panel, at least to me. And we really wanted to include this because without the capital, without the investments, none of the industries can work, especially the education technology, because this is one industry, it is going to take enough capital before we get really large businesses out there. Now, I've been a part of this. I've raised several rounds of investments from Shantanu, from Pankaj, right? So, and even from Kaizen. So they are more like buddies to me now. I hope so. So
that's a good start that you're saying you don't want to kill us.
Yeah. So I've had great experience with each one of these, and I, as an entrepreneur, faced a lot of challenges initially, how to raise investment, how to go about things. So this panel was particularly interesting to me, and I'm sure in the audience there'll be a lot of people having lots of questions. If I may ask you, how many of you guys are looking to raise investment? Nice. That's good. More the better. We know that the industry is moving forward. So I'll let everybody introduce himself because we have a pretty solid panel here. And they've done some amazing stuff. And each one actually comes with, while you can put them in a category of investors, let me tell you, each one of us is so different from each other. With the size of the investments they do, the theme that they have. So if you can, sir, introduce yourself, that'll be awesome.
I guess I'm introducing myself for the second time, but I guess in a different context. So Gaurav, Mehra, partner at Kaizen Private Equity, India's only education-focused fund. We invest in companies that are in the education space, all the way from technology, of course, at one end of the spectrum, companies like WizIQ and Impartis right there, all the way to good old brick and mortar learning delivery companies and education delivery companies. We typically enter really at a revenue positive, about Series A type of situation typically. Although in EdTech we are more stage agnostic, we're happy to come in a little bit lower. But we really look for interesting scalable business models. You have to be able to really grow into a category and regional leader, obviously. But we're very happy to be part of that growth, work very, very closely with the portfolio companies.
Hi, my name is Pankaj Makkar. I'm the Managing Director of Bertelsmann in India and Bertelsmann India Investments, which is our venture arm in the country. Bertelsmann is a large media services and education conglomerate. Especially on the education side, in the last 2-3 years, we have been investing globally in various assets, whether it's Udacity in the Valley or brick and mortar institutions in the US, services companies in the education side in US and Europe, to distance education in China, and similar businesses in India. So we have a fairly large mandate when we are looking at investments across the board. I specifically look at investments in India, and WizIQ is one of my investments, as well as a company called iNurture, which is based out of Bangalore in the higher education space. We are typically a Series B, Series C investors, so we typically come after, let's say, a Kaizen or a Helion would invest, and we typically look at products which are becoming aspiring leaders in their own segments, and they are looking for growth capital in the venture capital industry to make these products dominant within the space that they operate in. That's essentially the space that we typically come in. We typically write a $5 to $15 million check, and happy to talk more about our way of investing as we go on in the panel. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alok, and as Harman mentioned, I represent a firm called Helion Ventures, where I'm an investment partner. Helion is a relatively young VC firm. We have been around for now 9 years. We have a total of about $600 million under management now. We invest across consumer internet companies, which includes online services and e-commerce. And we also invest in enterprise companies, which includes both outsourcing as well as B2B technology companies, primarily SaaS companies. I personally invest in all the enterprise tech companies myself. But as a firm, we have done investments across a number of areas, including education sector as well. Just to give examples, in our current fund, we have invested in a JEE test prep, or rather I would say more a post-high school test prep company called Topper. And we have also invested in a company called Simply Learn, which is a certification test prep company for working professionals.
Thank you. My name is Rishi Kapal. As an organization, I represent Edugild, which is India's first edtech startup accelerator. So we basically mentor, institutionalize, and fund entities who are using technology for education. As an institution, I represent a group from Pune. We have 71 institutes in Maharashtra, right from kindergarten to PhD centers of excellence. As a professional, I am an academician by choice. Till 2013, I was heading Sony Ericsson as an interim managing director in India. Then I became a teacher and an author for McGraw-Hill. And now what I drive is a passion to see state-of-the-art technology being used for education. And I'm really, I would say, glad and honored to be a part of a panel which can evolve a lot for making me learn a lot of things as we go into the EdTech journey together. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Shantanu Prakash and I'm the founder and managing director at Educomp. Educomp is a large education company. We have a presence in several areas in education, ranging from educational content to schools, higher education, skill development, test prep, as well as a few international ventures. Over the course of our journey over the past 7-8 years, in particular, we've invested in more than 10 education companies, both ed tech as well as non-ed tech. We've had successful exits in 4 of them, and very proud of our investment in WizIQ and partnering visionary entrepreneurs who have the passion like Harman here. So really happy to be here, Harman. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks everybody. So let's just jump into some of the questions. And as I said, each one of these guys represent a different theme of their own investment, because Kaizen being a Series A kind of investor, Bertelsmann being a foreign organization with setting up a fund in India, they have interest in all over the world, and they've seen educational, especially education technology models elsewhere, especially China, and I was very surprised with a lot of things they were doing. Alok from Helion, they typically invest in digital companies, right? And they yet have an education investment practice. With Shantanu, he's built an education company himself. He's actually one of those who started from zero and built $1 billion company, and he makes investments in other companies. And I'm very excited to know about Rishi today, because it's an accelerator. So whenever we talk about accelerators in investment, we know that the industry is moving really fast. So I met with Rishi for the first time today, and in fact, I have a lot of questions for him. All right, so let's jump into the first one. So, India is what I've observed is a catch-up market in many respects. We catch up on things that is happening elsewhere, right? That's a great thing. While there is a lot of new stuff happening in India, but playing catch up is a valid strategy as far as investments go. So, what business models you guys think are going to catch up in India that have worked elsewhere?
All right, I'll go. So first of all, I do think that most of the innovation in education is still largely on the periphery. A lot of the core of the education has not been addressed, primarily because on the core there is a lot of regulatory issues. Some other people talked about the fact that there is an issue with the education that sometimes the buyer versus the user is actually different person, and all the challenges you face because the L&D person in the enterprise is trying to push something, but the user really doesn't want to do something, and therefore a lot of the innovation is on the periphery. But still, if you sort of disaggregate the sector, in the K through 5 kind of a segment, I think that segment is mostly, I would argue, is more edutainment oriented, because again, you can't attack the core there. But there are kinds of businesses which I think will be very exciting, which package both content and delivery and mix with entertainment. There are businesses which, if you sort of move slightly higher up the chain until grade 12th, which are around the tutoring market. Again, we have seen certain businesses happen in the past, and I think there are more models which are coming around that market. There are then test prep oriented market which go all the way from grade 11, 12 to college and even for working professional, and also which are skill enhancement markets which are I think pretty similar. So at least in my opinion, those are models which are not necessarily entirely different from what we have seen elsewhere. So I would put them in the category of catch-up, but many of them have been pretty successful as well in India as well.
Probably just to kind of add to what Alok was saying, and I think as Bertelsmann, we always try to think about a structure in which we can define what opportunities emerge in which part of the world, and from that perspective, what would kind of come out of India as well. And not only for education, but this is relevant to education, we have 3 unique buckets of opportunities that we fundamentally kind of look at. The first one are global business models that we know have worked in other parts of the world, and there is a need for those business models in a country like India as well. Now, in a non-edtech environment, that could be an Amazon model that Flipkart has put together, or there are, on the education side, the Udacity, Udemy, a whole bunch of these models which will get replicated in a country like India. And then the question that we ask ourselves when we are looking at investments in such models is, why is it that it's unique that a company in India will win that market versus a global major trying to do that? So I think that is one bucket of opportunities that we look at, and the lens that we usually look, kind of evaluate it through. The second bucket, and trying not taking too much time, is the bucket wherein we try to see that there are certain models which are unique for a country like India because there's a systemic problem here. Test prep as one specific example that may be an opportunity which might be relevant in a few countries, including India, and that's a unique concept. The third kind of bucket, and this is a very interesting bucket for us as Bertelsmann, is that are there companies that are coming out of India that address global problems? And we feel that in the education space especially, we will see these trends coming in. Simply Learn is actually one opportunity, WizIQ is another. There are a whole bunch of companies that are, or entrepreneurs that are innovating in education for the global market, and given that a lot of them come from IITs, IIMs, have worked for Infosys, they've worked for international organizations, they understand various markets, they come back and they innovate for global markets, and I think that is a trend that we should watch out for.
Can I just take a shot at it? What we have seen, I mean, in this accelerator space, since the last 6 weeks, we've got around 155 applications from 155 edtech startups. And what we are realizing is that if some company creates a space, everybody else intentionally or unintentionally tries to compete in the same space rather than expanding the market. So it's not a fight for counter share like it is in retail, that I got 30% share of counter or 40% share of counter. There has to be an evolution where you try to expand the market further. I'll give you a small example. We are trying to work with the Helen Keller Institute of Deaf, Mute and Blind, because there is no specific ways of learning or development which happen with that community, so to say, at least to the extent of my knowledge. When we went aggressively into depths on how technology can help them, they said that they are very short of sign language interpreters. And sign language is not a recognized language, at least in India, I'm told. But if you look at Queensland in Australia, they have multiple applications wherein local languages using three-dimensional imaging and using virtual signs, people are taught sign language through mobile apps, through technology. So if somebody has to innovate, it is not just about competing in the same market. If you try to expand that market and also ensure that every kind of individual and every kind of person who wants to learn becomes a part of it, then catch me does not happen. Then you are actually every time innovating to create a new market space and create new and healthy competition in that space.
You're going to go? Go ahead. After you.
Harman, I don't necessarily agree that the Indian education market has been a catch-up market, actually. If you really look at the data, there are several areas in which India is leading in the adoption of technology. There are some very obvious examples. If you look at the level of technology penetration in private schools in India, that is way higher than many countries of the developed world, that is Europe, US, and so on. So we are not playing catch-up there. Certainly, as Pankaj said, we are not playing catch-up on test prep. We are not playing catch-up on the tutoring market, for example. There are some unique characteristics of the Indian education market. And there has been local innovation, there has been local entrepreneurship that has met those needs. For example, our higher education market, for example, one of the largest privately held higher education markets in the world is in India. Over 75% of capacity of engineering education and professional education in India is in private hands. That is not true almost anywhere else in the world. And the scale at which things happen in India is greater. Yes, there are some areas of edtech, and I think it's primarily because Indian education entrepreneurs haven't really thought global. And I think probably because the Indian domestic market has been so large, that has somewhere mentally prevented us from thinking that we can build products for a global audience. For example, the entire revolution on online learning and MOOCs simply passed us by, and now we are trying to catch up with that market. But except for that one small segment of the market, I think we are doing pretty okay in terms of innovation in education technology in India.
Yeah. The nice thing about going last is you have to say very little. But complete agreement. I think that India has some unique characteristics. Sheer shortage is a characteristic of this market that can be filled in many, many, many different ways. Regulation is a characteristic of this market. It may be an impediment to business. It may be an entry barrier if you find the right model. Last mile infrastructure continues to be a problem. Because of regulation and slow change and bureaucracy, opportunities such as iNurture to augment and enrich curriculums is an opportunity, which is not necessarily an opportunity elsewhere. The recognition that, especially in professional courses, global curricula are becoming fairly uniform. Big data is big data is big data wherever you teach it. Creates global opportunity from here when you attach tutors from here to go out across the world. Markets from India through emerging Asia to Africa have similar characteristics of shortage, need, last mile infrastructure that are not being tackled by US technology companies. When we look at Impartus, we see a clear green field which is not sufficiently interesting to somebody abroad, but can be large enough and can be monetized in many different ways when you prepare that technology for this kind of characteristic. It's like the Israelis prepared certain kinds of line drivers in the good old days for communication that the American companies didn't bother with and ended up being some of the biggest suppliers on the planet. We see those kinds of opportunities here. So we see just the massive market. 60% of the world's consumption is here within Asia. India will remain one of the largest pieces of that consumption. When that bigger market sits here with the kind of growth numbers that Amit Sevak put up earlier in the morning, you have enormous opportunity. And you will see some Me Too's, you will see local patents, you will see business models that grow out of here, and that's why we like to be sitting here in the middle of this.
All right, so there are a lot of interesting points that 60% of the consumption of education is in India. There's a lot of regulations in India. I for one, actually believe that within the education technology sector, as you said, Shantanu, there's a lot more innovation compared to other sectors, right? So definitely education technology is not a Me Too sector in India. Now, talking about this, 60% of the consumption is going to happen in India. It's happening. And over the last few years, the education technology investments have definitely increased, right? I've spoken to so many investors. So many investors are now talking about who have never invested in education are at least talking about it, right? At the same time, while the investments are increasing, we haven't seen a whole lot of investments happening in this space compared to other space like e-commerce or taxi business or whatever, right? So why do you think that's the case? If there's such a large consumption that's happening, what's stopping us from spotting opportunities that can bring scale? Because we as entrepreneurs would like to hear that.
I think that's definitely a very interesting question, Harman, and it's something that we kind of think about every day. For us to invest behind businesses which are scalable and create a lot of value, need to have a market which is fairly large. Now, India is a fairly large market, but when you start breaking the market down into various segments, until unless you are building a strong platform which Educomp has built, K-12 opportunity tends to be more regional in nature. You see a lot of players that have built regional K-12 schools, preschools and so on, and a company like Bertelsmann, we know that this, of course, if these are regional in nature, not even pan-India, can we take them global as well? So that's a question mark on size. The second big point which we start kind of talking about a little bit was regulation. And I think in India, education is a regulated good, and that would close down certain opportunities which fundamentally in countries like Brazil we would see. And that kind of restricts the kind of opportunities that exist over here, which is why perhaps the way to look at education opportunities is more the enabling form of opportunities that enable within the regulated environment versus trying to disrupt the regulated environment, because that will not happen because the government has not opened it up.
Just to add to it, I think regulation is one big part. Couple of other areas. One I refer to is that in education, the consumption versus the buying and the different stakeholders in the picture can be actually pretty complex. Even in the case of a K through 12, there is a school as an entity, there is a teacher as an entity, there is a parent as an entity, and then there is the actual child who's going to the education. And sometimes one has to question as to who is actually the influencer buyer here in this process and who's the eventual beneficiary. So I think that also plays a role in the complexity of the sales cycle, therefore. But there is also one other factor which I think in the previous panel somebody referred to, which is this notion of instant gratification. In this business, it's actually not easy to be able to deliver an outcome, or at least give the perception of delivery of an outcome that easily. Which is why when we talk of test prep, let's say I'm doing a GRE test prep, I know that I'm buying this 5,000 rupee course, 1 month down the line I have this GRE exam, I take the exam, if I get 720 out of 800, I'm pretty happy. However, for most part, saying that your child is going to learn more when that student is in class 4th, it's very hard to calibrate what really happened out of it. So I think that notion that closing the feedback loop is not that easy in this segment.
Harman, you mentioned about why is not enough capital chasing potentially scaled up education models in India. I think we should modify that question a little bit. Why is not enough institutional capital chasing education in India? If you see the domestic capital investment in education, that is in excess of $10 billion a year. A few years back, BCG did a study for us on the size of the education market. The current numbers are there are about 5,000 new schools that get established every year in India. Okay? Average 10 crores to 15 crores a pop, easily. That's about 60, 70,000 crores of domestic investment that goes into education every year. That's a reality. Okay? Look at the higher education sector. Okay? Now, let's shift a little bit. Okay? Why is institutional money not going in? There is only one clear answer. Okay? That's regulation. Okay? Unless we as a nation agree that there can be some return on capital in investment in formal education, that's not going to happen. The amount of money that's required for some of the ed tech stuff, it doesn't add up to much really. Even if you look at all the people seeking capital in education today, obviously not everyone is going to get funded, but even if you add that up, I would think it's probably won't even add up to $500 million. Take the example of your company. You're one of the success stories out of India, but the total amount of capital you have raised is not very high. Okay? So education technology, which is a good thing, education technology in India is not as capital investment, and that's great, that's good for efficiency of capital. And the sectors that really need capital, there is a gate, there's regulation. So you can't get institutional capital inside. Hopefully someday that's actually going to change. But now if you look at the global scenario, the largest amount of investment globally has also gone into formal education. If you look at companies like Laureate or Pearson, if you analyze the investments that they have made and you bifurcate, then what are the sectors? Formal, vocational, textbook, ed tech. Ed tech is actually a very small part of that investment. So countries such as Brazil, for example, that have opened up their education economy, they're attracting very large amounts of capital, but most of that capital is actually going into formal education.
Yeah, and I think, again, what do we mean by education investing? As he said, there's a whole bunch of places that are being invested. I'll give you some other stuff. I think globally, we have not treated universities as corporations. 17,000 crores rupees was the number I heard the other day that gets spent by Indian universities as the cost of student acquisition every year. That's a $3 billion market. How many of you are attacking that market? I'll be very happy to fund somebody who's going after that $3 billion.
There it is.
It's amenable to digital marketing, it's amenable to marketplaces, it's amenable to every bit of technology, but did we think of colleges as companies that buy? We don't.
Just from the accelerator perspective, whatever relationships we have fostered with the investing community, at least we've not seen them there's no reservation for them to invest, provided there is, as you rightly mentioned, scalability available. So if you look at regulation aside, and if you then start to look at EdTech more broadly, rather than just KG to PG or K-12, we're going to skill development, into corporate learning and development, into ancillary services, there might be some opportunities which are actually highly capital intensive. But the community, I would say the investor community says, you bring those opportunities and we will definitely be interested in them. I think maybe it has not reached that stage yet.
Got it. So, Gaurav made a very interesting point on, if you look at all the educational institutions as corporations, then you would also see that they spend a lot of money on acquiring their customers, $3 billion in India. Now, that's a whole lot of money. If somebody can crack that model, and I know of some company that tried to unsuccessfully, but somebody can figure out that model, there's a lot of money on the table. So now, another reason I see, Shantanu, besides all the investments that you were talking about, that why institutional investors are not there, is maybe also because there haven't been many exits, right? And those exits are a function of scale, and we definitely haven't seen. You build a very scalable business, of course, but that's a reality. That's quite rare. So, what are those challenges? What are those hurdles that are not letting education technology businesses scale? What is it that we as entrepreneurs need to look at?
So I think that's a good point. Not enough exits in the Indian education space, and that's a deterrent for money to come in. I broadly agree with that proposition. But what was there to exit in the first place? Okay, let's ask that question. Okay, there aren't enough investee companies out there in education. There have been a bunch of, if you remember, 2008, 2009, there was a whole burst of money that got into education. Okay, private capital, that institutional capital that got invested in education. But that was more on the potential that the Indian education market is going to actually deliver returns. So the gap between promise and potential was too huge. And I think overall as a sector, education sector hasn't really performed to the expectations of private investors, and that's across the board. But I think that was the phase one. That was the first time in between 2007 and 2009 that foreign money even came into education for almost the very first time. And people have sort of changed their strategy now. I think the second round of investment is going to be, I think, far more selective, and we will probably 3 to 5 years later see a large number of successful exits. One of the great things that's happened is, of course, the internet, and that is actually going to change the dimension of how we look at education investments in India, because you can really divide Indian education into two buckets. I would say pre-internet and post-internet, because you can't really think of ed-tech investments if you think that you don't have an internet infrastructure. Then what ed-tech are you going to do? Okay, so pre-internet, you really have traditional education, which you can neither exit because you can't enter it in the first place. So post the internet revolution, I think you will see a lot more action happening.
Just to add, Harman, I actually don't think lack of exits is the issue. because lack of exits is an issue across the industry. Doesn't matter whether it's education technology or whether it's taxi apps or whatever else out there. I think the Indian venture industry has ailed from the lack of exits period. So I don't think that is necessarily the issue. I can at least speak on behalf of Helion that we, for example, invested in several non-tech educational businesses as well. And I think scalability does become a challenge. You know, while Shantanu, you pointed out the fact that 5,000, 50,000 schools, I forgot the figure that you said, and $10 billion have been invested. The reality is that in those offline-oriented businesses, scalability is very, very linear.
Very linear.
And purely from a venture investing or institutional investing perspective, those businesses become hard from a return perspective. We are seeing a dramatic change, however, in the businesses that we have funded of late, which are more tech-centric. And I think we will see a lot more investment go in this sector.
Yeah, and I think it is, as he just said, it's a little bit of an, I came out of a education investors forum yesterday, where all of this was exactly the topics for discussion. I think when we talk education, and we talk successful companies, we're tending to talk these days K-12 and higher ed, and what we can do on the consumer side. NIIT is a highly successful education company, scaled like nobody's business in a real world model. Aptech did the same. Educomp built themselves out. Tata Interactive is one of the world's largest custom content companies on the planet. These are education companies. Let's not lose perspective here. Just like the first wave of Indian tech was IT services, there was a wave of a certain kind. Now the technology enabled elements are catching up. We'll get all sorts of interesting things happening.
That's actually very heartening to know that the investors are gung-ho about investments in edtech. So it's pretty amazing because I meet with so many people. They have some amazing ideas. And Rishi, I was quite fascinated with the stuff that you're doing, education, startup community. We'll talk a lot more about it later. I need to wrap up this session. We are running late. Let's open up the forum from the audience. Any questions if anybody has? There it is.
Hello. Hello. I'm Pankaj. I run a small tourism education company, learntourism.com. My question is to Mr. Shantanu Prakash. You are only one listed company in the listed space in India. I mean, if you talk about the listed space, overseas, there are many billion-dollar companies. And the corporate governance issue that your company also came across, or whatever the issues were, so there are challenges to be in the listed space, to be in India. There are big challenges. So how you address that issue?
So,
I mean, your question is that there are challenges for listed education companies? Well, I mean, there are challenges for every company. I mean, these are business challenges that you go through. I think, firstly, there are a large number of listed education companies in India. Just to correct your knowledge on that, I think there are over 20 listed education companies in India. And I think many of them are very niche. For example, over 6 or 7 test prep companies in India are listed. There are a few diversified companies. Educomp is a diversified company that are listed in the Indian stock markets. And I think challenges of education companies are similar to challenges of other sectors in India. Take, for example, the real estate sector. Okay, there are several sectors in India that are currently facing a bunch of macro issues, and education is no different from that.
Yep. Actually, was your question that there aren't enough listed companies or not enough listed edtech companies, or what was the question?
so
Okay.
So, can we have the next question? Yeah, please.
So here, can I go ahead? Okay. So I have a very quick question. In terms of the education is typically funded by parents in India, rather than, taking a loan or such things. So I'm looking at, if you're looking at education which is being funded by parents, I'm saying that today parents are already spending about 10% of their income in doing the regular education, which going to the traditional schools and all that. So how much flexibility do you think that the Indian parents' wallet has to further accommodate anything coming out of this edutech or any other kind of, funding that they can do? Like, what is the percentage that you think?
So your question is that Indian parents are already funding the traditional education for their kids. How much more room there is for them to fund for new products and services?
Yes.
So that's Indian consumer, Indian parent. How much money would they spend on their kids? I think they would even take loans to spend money on their kids if they see the right product with the right value. I don't think that question needs to go to the panel. It's pretty obvious. And Indian parents have deep pockets. They might not have a lot of income, but they have deep pockets.
Sorry, can I add a comment to? I'm still tempted to address. I think there is an underlying assumption in your question that parents are going to be paying for everything as well. And I think if you look across industries, there are business models where it's actually, there are very creative ways in terms of who pays. And I'll give you a completely different industry, just to give you an example. Take a company called Zenefits in US. Zenefits is a SaaS company which is allowing benefits administration for enterprises. Classically, the model has been always that you go to enterprises are going to pay for that software. And you could debate as to how many companies can pay, how much profit do they have, they're already paying for so many software, are they going to pay for yet another one or not? Zenefits does not charge a dime to these companies. How do they make money? They're actually connecting these enterprise users to the providers of these benefit companies. So the monetization can be actually in many different ways. I don't think we should necessarily make the assumption that it's parents necessarily who are going to pay for it. I don't have a good answer. I can't tell you that look at business X in education where this is happening, but I don't think we should close our minds to the possibilities that exist there as well.
Well, let me go further. You have multiple opportunities here in the question you asked. If you can deliver the outcome at a lower cost, you're not adding to the wallet, you're saving in the wallet. If you have ways to finance, India is a severely underfinanced country where student loans go. We are looking at investing in models for financing. That's also education from our point of view. If you look up and follow one of the hottest startups in the US right now, I forget the name, unfortunately, it's an ex-Googler. He's basically raised an enormous amount of money because he's going after financing students and education. Yeah. There you go. So inside that question, there is massive opportunity. So please take a look at some ideas and come back to us.